Hey.
AP says 2 killed in the Iran protests. Semi-official news agency quotes officials in Western Iran saying 2 protesters killed overnight.
Like overnight, a couple hours ago. Meaning, okay. Huh.
Yeah, I don't know what that means. Semi-official news agency. Sanctions are working.
Yeah. All right, I am queued up. I'm gonna do a little Susie and the Banshees bumper. All right. I know. We'll see, right? Funny, I have radio internet at home, which actually I'm very impressed with. But meanwhile, here at KFI, we have shitty Wi-Fi. Are you getting dropouts? Are you guys getting a green flash, or is that just me? Nope, a little signal looks really good tonight. Green flash. You did see a green flash? Okay.
Learn more about ASU Online. Text school to 37913. That's SCHOOL to 37913.
So that's not me. I thought it was.
The brand new limited edition Cadillac Glacier Metallic CTSV and $50,000 cash. Join us at San Manuel Casino this New Year's Eve, where we're giving away over $220,000 in cash and prizes, including a brand new Cadillac Glacier Metallic.
Really? And someone says police activity in Pomona. I told Kennedy, and she said yes. I told Kennedy a couple hours ago. I said, she's hosting Fox's New Year's Eve tomorrow night. And I said, please say nobody's balls are dropping in 11-degree weather tomorrow. And she said, done. So we'll see. Might be the green flash might be because I have a clip on the touch sensitive part of the screen. We'll see if that works. We're like brother sister. Also, her brother's a really good friend of mine. Her brother was a deputy sheriff in Portland in Multnomah County when I worked up there, and so we're buddies. All right, here we go. Susie and the Banshees. Oh, Steve Harvey. I'll tune in. My God.
KFI AM 640.
An iHeart radio station.
Home of KFI in the sky.
KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk. It is the Dark Secret Place. Brian Sutin here, live until midnight. And in 2009, in Iran, protests erupted, beginning in Tehran, with students and other ponytail hippies like that. And the Iranian government didn't take them too seriously initially, but they spread very quickly because of that darn social media. And this past 48 hours in Iran, it seemed to have spread a lot more organically, with word getting out that protests are happening in other parts of Iran. But it is a bit different than it was in 2009 when people were texting, pictures of posters of how to organize your neighborhood and things like that. The social media was used to actually remotely organize and inspire a lot of these. In this case, social media is just passing on what's going on, and that something far different is happening than in 2009. In that, evidently, many Iranian cities, not just the major cities like Tehran and Isfahan and Tabriz and those huge urban centers, that a lot of Iranian medium-sized cities were at a medium boil, just waiting for the lid to come off. And that the standard of living in Iran, the unemployment rate, especially amongst young people, is just extraordinary. And this is happening after years of promises that even though Iranians weren't having kids, it'll be okay because it'll be more jobs for everyone else. And a lot of the protest videos that you're seeing include middle-aged men. This one guy is yelling at a TV reporter that he has 2 master's degrees, but he's unemployed. And it's because the Iranian economy is in the pooper for a couple reasons. Reason number one is because the price of energy cratered 5 years ago, as you all recall. Thanks to whoever invented fracking in the United States, the petro mafia, whether it's Putin or whether it's Iran, has had to scrape the bottom of the barrel. But then, of course, along comes this nuclear deal where the Iranians just simply have to say out loud that they're complying, and that is the entire length. That's all the inspection they need. And they get hundreds of billions delivered to them of their own, granted, of their own money, but that we were, as far as international law goes, holding on to. So now the Iranians are cash rich, and you would think that was one of the initial claims was, well, this will lift the Iranian economy out of the pooper, and so there will be a flowering, there will be a demand for their voices to be heard and all that. Well, that's not what happened with the money. What happened with the money is that the officials wet their beaks. They all got a piece of it, and none more than the 82-year-old, I'm sorry, the 79-year-old Ayatollah Khamenei. And again, not that I think anyone out there is stupid. I just want to remind you that the inspiration for the Iranian Revolution in 1979 to overthrow the Shah was the Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, who was exiled in Paris and who would record cassettes, and the cassettes would make it into Iran, and they would be re-recorded, and that effectively, by the way, was viral cassetting, right? Wasn't it? And so he died a decade and a half ago, or a little more. And the supreme leader, the head of the Supreme Islamic Council, which is the power broker in Iran, is the Ayatollah Khamenei, and he is now worth the estimate. The estimate is $65 billion, and much of it comes from property seizures in Iran. So people are extremely angry at the economy. They're extremely angry, and this is one of the things that China knows, that Iran apparently doesn't know, is take the shackles off, let people prosper, let them keep what they make, as much of it as they can, but if they ever question your authority, smash them with tanks. Well, this is what the Iranians have not done. That Iran has the money. They also, because the black market out of Iran is huge. It's estimated to be about a third of the GDP, of the gross domestic product. Well, that should be legitimate. But the Iranians are not allowing it to be legitimate. And so this is a self-inflicted wound. They have saddled their own economy, and their people are extraordinarily dissatisfied. Because here's what we've learned since 1979. You can make women wear a chador. You can tell men that they have to go to the mosque or Hostanea 5 times a day, the whole thing, as long as there's steaks in the freezer and their kids have decent schools and there's an economy and you have a job to go to. This is where the Iranians, since their reliance on petro money, have hit a brick wall, and they haven't even realized it, because they did something else about 4 years ago that has brought people out to the streets. It's not just the bad economy, and it's not just the high unemployment. There's something else that's different from 2009, something kind of a big deal. And I'll tell you about it right after this. It is the Dark Secret Place, tracking the Iranian protests as we speak. And then Michael Chappé told me there's an unconfirmed report of several dead already. This is day 3. It's about 10 a.m. in Tehran. The protests aren't going anywhere, so we'll continue tracking those. Also, airliners leaving without call signs or destinations out of Tehran. That more coming up. It is a Dark Secret Place, KFI AM 640, streaming live on YouTube. Go to unsheepyourself.com, and you can watch the live stream. KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk. Michael Chappé with the news.
Apparently a little earthquake, or moderate shallow magnitude 3.5 quake reported.
Alrighty. Yeah, Kennedy was my intern at K-Rock. We got to be really good buddies. And then when our program director left K-Rock and went to MTV, he took our music director, Luz Largent, who did 120 minutes. And then Matt Money Smith became the music director at K-Rock. And then he asked me if I wanted to go. He was the guy that got me in radio. And he asked me if I wanted to make the jump to TV. And I said, no. Radio has a brilliant future. And someday I'll get into talk radio. So I stayed at K-Rock. And Kennedy, you can see a mile away, needed a TV show. And so she went. She was a great VJ, I thought. And then she and I got into talk radio at the same station in Seattle. She had moved to Seattle. She had just started an FM talk show literally the week I got back from Bosnia. So I ran up to Seattle to do in studio with her for 3 hours. And the program director at Cairo AM 710 in Seattle offered me the job, the 9 to midnight job, to get into talk radio. So that's how I got into talk radio, and that's how she got into talk radio. So yeah, we're really good buddies. She married well. Her husband's a great guy, total stud, great guy, snowboarder. Oh, whew. So, so yeah, here's my pitch. The Dark Secret Place TV channel on YouTube, we're building it out. We have an editor and lighting guys, and we're gonna build a set. I'll still have my garage. That'll be like where the live stuff is. But the other episodes, which are sometimes 14 minutes, sometimes they're 2 hours. That'll be produced a lot better. And so if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do. It's the Dark Secret Place, or if you search for Dark Secret Place. I deleted yesterday's video because I couldn't edit it, because I made a very indiscreet comment on camera, and I don't want that staying up there. So I took it down before I have to answer for it. But yeah, so we're going on Patreon because one of the things that we can do on YouTube is, I can do regular videos. I can do a daily show. I mean, actually a daily hit at noon, and, go to work, and effectively do a daily radio show. I'm, a little tired of waiting around for, to become a regular again on here on KFI. But I will have a daily show one way or another. And so we're on Patreon. Patreon, because if what we're going to do is once or twice a month we will do a private video chat where I will have experts who can identify themselves and things like that, and that'll be for a higher Patreon level. So there's a premium there. If you contribute more, you can contribute $1 a month, and your name is on a list. You're an early adopter. We love you. But there's other levels and other premiums that come with that. If you're not a ConnectPal member on the podcast, if you go to Patreon, you can read I think second to the top level. You get access to all the private video chats that we're going to be doing, plus you get the podcast. You get the ConnectPal podcast, which was a little different. The podcast, most people listen in their car, obviously. But that's the great thing about YouTube, is that when you subscribe and you get an alert that a video is up, you can stream it to your car, through Bluetooth. Then another thing that we're doing, and this is huge, is if anyone out there plays Battlegrounds or H1Z1, is that there's a studio in Beverly Hills that ConnectPal is still the primary information delivery device, right? And I talk about stuff that's way different than the YouTube stuff. But what's really exciting is getting behind these games like Battlegrounds or H1Z1, and then amongst all of you, any of you who game, we'll do Dark Secret Place only tournaments, and then sometimes I'll invite probably special guests like retired Navy SEAL, retired Delta Force guy, and so if you're into H1Z1 or Battlegrounds, you're not gonna be playing 16-year-old Koreans, on this. You're gonna be, and PUBG. You're gonna be playing against some real, operators, and we'll see how they do. And then we'll actually get together. We'll have some events where we'll play live, and maybe we'll bring some LAPD. LA Sheriff Department, former Marines. Oh. All right, I'm back on the air apparently. Jolene, your clock. It's gonna happen. It's happening probably tomorrow. Sorry. Very sorry. KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk. The Dark Secret Place, Brian Suits in here until midnight live, and this is one of these nights where, because so much of our content is happening, 11 hours away, or 10 hours away, that it's a oddly advantageous thing that we're buried here at 10 p.m. Because, as I say, this is we're almost equidistant. Well, no, that's not true. But things happen in North Korea oftentimes when we're on the air. Also, as I say, it's early in the morning in Tehran and in Iran. So anyway, as I was saying before the break, during my very professional radio tease, that the Iranian economy, the influx of these billions of dollars, and the Islamic Republic ordering, Boeing 787s and a bunch of high-end stuff, that this is not translated into an economic boom for the Iranian people, because there are still significant UN resolutions preventing the export of certain things and the import. That's kind of the main thing, is that Iran's not going to make anything if they cannot import high tech or create their own. So that has been an ongoing tension now for 20 years in Iran, and it is one of the reasons that Iran has one of the lowest population replacement rates ever in the recorded history of that measurement. In fact, the lowest. No one really understood, 60 years ago, demographers were looking at average lifespan of people and average family size and things like that. No one really understood the effect on a society if they stopped having babies. And ever since the importance of that, what's called replacement population measurement has happened, nobody, no society, no ethnicity has been eating its tail faster than the Iranians. And it's really hard to reverse. Vladimir Putin reversed it in Russia, at least for 20 years or so. The French in Canada, in Quebec, they reversed it 100 years ago because they're Catholic. But Iran doesn't know what the secret sauce is here. And so, crappy economy, a out-of-touch, authoritarian, extraordinarily wealthy power class, and they've been chugging along for 20 years with that reality in Iran. Now along comes what's happened over the past 4 years. Young men leaving and dying in Syria. And so when a country is not producing babies to become adult Iranians, every child is precious. And what's happening in Iran, believe it or not, the Chinese, because of their one-child policy, they're very casualty averse. They went to war with Vietnam in 1979, and they freaked out. They lost 35,000 people in 3 months. They went back to war with them in 1994, and in a span of a few weeks, lost a couple thousand guys. The Chinese don't like losing people because of the one-child policy. Well, the Iranians never cared what the public said, but they have been panicking about the fact that for every 35-year-old in Iran right now, for every 25 or 35-year-old in uniform defending Iran, there's only half a boy to replace him. So in other words, the fighting cohort of potential soldiers is going to be cut in half in about 15, 20 years because nobody's having babies. Married couples are either having one kid or they're having no kids. Women are also fleeing Iran. And so this seems to be a little different than 2009. Because in 2009, there was no Arab Spring, was there? There was no civil war in Syria. Well, here in 2017, not only has Iran committed Hezbollah, the Lebanese militia, who, by the way, have no problem having kids. The Arabs are having kids, but the Persians are not. And so when the Iranians committed the Republican Guard, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the Revolutionary Guard, or Pasdaran as they're called, they began losing guys. And they initially were drafting and sending people from very regime-supportive regions. And so certain areas were losing people at a higher rate than others, so they started spreading that around. Well, nobody likes losing their son. Losing your son in 2017, losing your 21-year-old son in 2017 is way different than it was in 1977 or even 87 or 97. And they have been losing a lot of people. The Iranians have not admitted to their own people how many they've lost, but they have lost thousands of guys in Syria fighting for Assad and fighting with the Russians. Rarely fighting ISIS, but usually fighting the Free Syrian rebels. And this seems to be the straw that broke the camel's back for the Iranian people, because this is a far different thing, because it's their grievances are revealed in their chants. They're saying death to Khamenei, death to the Revolutionary Guard, death to Syria. They're not saying, the people are not saying death to America, death to Israel, death to Bush. They're saying death to their own authorities. So we're on day 2 of this. And my early prediction, well, I'll tell you that right after this. It is the Dark Secret Place. You can add me on the Twitter machine at Dark Secret Place, or you can just come on board the live stream at unsheepyourself.com. That's where the YouTube live stream is. Right back right after this with where these riots, where this unrest inevitably will go right after this. KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk. Michael Chapay with the news.
The South LA man has been arrested for a swatting prank that led to the death of a man in Wichita, Kansas.
Yeah, iHeart is like a total of like a 4-minute delay because we're on a 1-minute delay here because of what unnamed people said about Whitney Houston. So we're already on a 1 minute delay. Which is one reason I'm not a big fan of doing play-by-play on Pursuits, because you can just turn the TV on and you're watching it live with like a 4-second delay, you know, or 10 seconds at the most. Okay. Yeah, so I'm really excited about that, about doing the PC-based games like Battlegrounds or whatever. So because by the way, I play the games that I play, and I am middle-aged. So I know many of you, men and women, play PC games. I play Arma 3, which I like, and then another game called Red Orchestra or Darkest Hour, which is a Western Europe, 1944-45, U.S. and British versus German infantry and armored combat thing. Really, really great collaborative game. It's funny because you would look at the graphics and they look 10 years old, but the gameplay is terrific.
Show up on time and smell good when your house call is free.
Having an issue with your heat? Call us. Smell Good Plumber at Mike Hyman at 1-800-446-MIKE. Contractor license number 39917.
Hello, I'm Alan Mosnett, Toyota Orange, and we're wrapping up the year with a final holiday gift for you. Last December, we sold 973 Toyotas.
Yeah, I never played any Call of Duty or any of those.
Created the Holiday 1,000 Car Challenge. To reach our goal, we're practically giving Toyotas away. This means every car, truck, or SUV is priced to move. All 2,500 of them. That's a gift worth driving for. I just love that echo.
But yeah, I'm gonna be playing H1Z1 a lot tomorrow, and then Battlegrounds. But no, it's interesting because where was I going with this? Yeah, because I know someone who broadcasts the PC, the gaming team that a former Laker sponsors, and these dudes, these guys make literally $1 million a year, and they're like 21-year-old college students at UCLA. Wait, I have to get Blackpink ready. Now I have to tell Hector I'm queued up. I am queued up.
You could be riding high.
And then another thing with the Patreon thing for the YouTube channel is that I am getting a separate. I have a dual SIM phone, and then at a certain Patreon level, you'll have that number. And if you have a specific question, you're in a meeting, you're traveling, whatever. If you have a specific question, you can direct it to me one-to-one, and I'll get you an answer back. And I'll even cite you the, because as I've often said, I am not the expert in North Korea, but I know where that guy lives. And I'm not the expert in the development of ICBMs, but I know where those guys are in Monterey. And I'm not the expert in Saudi Arabia, but I know where that guy is. And that's kind of my method, is I have all these sources that I cultivate contact with. I am not that kind of pundit who knows fucking everything about everything. I hate that shit. Now, if you talk to me about the U.S. Army cavalry, armor, and field artillery, then yes, I'm a subject matter expert. I think it's really important to know what you know, and and then everything else, you know that you don't know that. So you go find people who do know that.
KFI AM 640.
An iHeart radio station.
Home of KFI in the sky.
Boombayah. Yeah, 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 boombayah. Yeah, 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 boombayah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk. It is a Dark Secret Place. Brian Suits in here until midnight, and if you want to follow along in English on the Tweeter machine, if you go to @Iran protest and then you click on latest, then you're seeing the live streaming and some of the live video that's coming out of Tehran this morning, Sunday, December 31st there. Also, though, and I'll add it onto one of my tweets, if you grab the Farsi hashtag, but just ask yourself this. If there was a huge spontaneous anti-Garcetti, unrest happening in L.A., what language would you be hashtagging in, right? In English. And, would you be doing it in Belgian or I'm sorry, Flemish or French or something like that, or Walloon? Maybe one or two of you would, but the majority of you would be doing it in your indigenous language. And so in that case, the Farsi hashtag is like a fire hose right now. So back in 2009, the Iranians marshaled their security forces pretty quickly. And two things happened that seem to be repeating themselves now. And that is that the local security forces in all of these far-flung towns, and so far these protests are more widespread than they were in 2009. But in the local security forces are being welcomed by the protesters, and the Revolutionary Guard and the countrywide militia that they have in Iran are the ones that are being jeered at and chanted at and all that. And there's and you have to understand this about how Iranian society works. There is a volunteer militia called the Basij, and if you're a man between 18 and about 50, just consider it a volunteer National Guard. You don't get paid to drill, but you donate your time and you pledge your loyalty to the regime. And in the event that a huge flash mob of militiamen are required to save the local mayor or local province or whatever, then they call you. And what you get in return is you get preference for civil service jobs, preference for other government-run things, medical care, employment in the administration of the Revolutionary Guards and things like that. But anyway, these are called the Basij, and these guys have been called out. And here's the deal. They're not very well trained. They're not particularly well led. And back in 2009, There was a famous story, a famous video of a young woman, 23, 24-year-old woman. She was a singer. And a shot rang out from down the block, and she dropped. She was shot in the upper chest by a militiaman on the roof of a government building with an AK. And that sort of became the symbol of the 2009 revolution. Those guys are out again. The other thing that happened in 2009 is as the protests spread across Tehran and other big towns, the security forces, unless they were the hardcore guys, the Revolutionary Guard guys, the guys who actually run with the Religious Supreme Council, actually run Iran, unless there were those guys who really had skin in the game of the regime, they were not dependable. Unless you were one of those guys, whoever you were, a city policeman, a traffic cop, or even some militiamen, after a couple days, they found that they were not dependable. So what did the Iranian regime do in 2009? Well, because the protests were pretty much concentrated in the West and the big cities, Tehran and Isfahan and Tabriz and the rest, what they did was they brought in security forces from the Far East, where many languages are spoken. And oftentimes Farsi is not one of them. So they brought in militiamen who did not understand Farsi. There are people in Iran who don't speak the main language. And they brought them in. And that mirrors very closely what the Chinese did in 1989 at Tiananmen Square. But that is how they broke up the protests. They brought guys in who couldn't hear what people were saying. Whereas when they started out, people were saying to the riot police, or actually, as the Iranians call them, the anti-riot police, which I guess is more accurate, they were saying, don't you remember me from high school? Don't you remember me from college? Remember me from the soccer club? And because Tehran cops are from Tehran, and cops in Tabriz are from Tabriz. And so that's how that works. And this is happening right now. And so the next step, and here's my prediction, they have a playbook. It worked in 2009. And it worked also because Obama didn't intervene. The British Secret Services began supporting the protesters because the Iranians, by the way, about an hour and a half ago, they shut down the cell service and internet, supposedly. But people learned in 2009 to always have a backup plan. And the largest cell phone company in the Middle East is Thuraya. And thousands of Thuraya satellite phones have been distributed since 2009. But anyway. The authorities are probably going to start bringing in security forces from the Far East, except there's a problem. Like I say, the difference between now and 2009 is that there is unrest in the Far East against the Pakistani border and et cetera. And so the next hurdle for the Iranians, if today's air traffic, and it's not even noon there, is any indication, a lot of people are fleeing Iran. They're taking advantage of the disarray maybe they're just deciding this is it. And they are packing their stuff and leaving. And if you remember 1979, I was just a kid, but I do remember, and by the way, if you remember 1979, chances are you sold your house in Beverly Hills for an ass load of cash. And something like that might be happening, except there aren't as many rich Iranians anymore. But where did they land in 1979, 1980? They landed right here. And many Iranians still have relatives, obviously, and contacts all around the Southland, from Glendale, all around Orange County, Beverly Hills, the Valley, the West Valley. So you bet, just like Venezuela, unrest in Venezuela, within a few days, and who knows, maybe down at LAX in a couple hours, you're going to start seeing the first wave of Iranians who have just absolutely had it and are getting out. We'll be back, or at least are here for a couple months to see which way the wind blows. We'll be back in just a minute. Hour number 2 of The Dark Secret Place, including a whole lot of North Korea. And does America have designs on eastern Syria? Well, President Mattis, as I call him, may have tipped our hand. That and more coming up. It is the final Dark Secret Place since 2017. I'm live on YouTube. Go to unsheepyourself.com and at Dark Secret Place on the Tweeter machine, and we'll see you on the other side of this news break. KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk.
KFI. Year in your ear.
Fidget spinners are almost mesmerizing.
Victims of sexual assault and supporters marching in Hollywood. It's called the Me Too March after the trending hashtag of recent weeks.
Breaking news, Charles Manson.
Yep. Saw the PBS Vietnam thing. I liked the first 4 episodes, and then I didn't really. They kept falling back on that device of they would focus on some guy who had a great life and he died in Vietnam, as if that was like some unique feature of the Vietnam War. That people die in war. There's really, really great people that die in war. It's really, really tragic. And but I wanted to see the history of the war. And that was kind of my problem with Ken Burns, is I would tell him, you know what, some really, really, really talented young men died in the Peloponnesian War. But knowing their backstory doesn't help me understand the Peloponnesian War. It doesn't really have any place in, if you're doing a historical documentary, to be a cold, insensitive, motherfucker about it. I don't need to focus on individual people. And here's the thing. A lot of it, I liked baseball. I liked the radio thing, Empire of the Air. I liked jazz. I love the Civil War. But Ken Burns really has the guy hasn't grown as a filmmaker. I mean, if you saw the Civil War, then you basically have seen what he does in a documentary. So, and to be honest, baseball didn't need 21 parts. This is the anniversary, by the way, December 30th, 2004. One of the last guys in my infantry company was killed in Baghdad, Damien Fysick. I wear the bracelet of the first guy who died, Jeremiah Schmunk. But Damien Fysick was a U.S. Army Ranger, great little guy, just a fire plug. Married, he was out of the Army, and he was in the Army National Guard. He was the kind of guy that made everyone around him a better soldier, especially the young guys who, in combat situations, especially if they were new to it, young men need an experienced sergeant or NCO to show them what right is. And Damien was absolutely the guy that you wanted in a firefight right next to you. So he was absolutely terrific. And it was one of the worst parts of Baghdad, this place called Haifa Street. And he was shot in the side before we had the Kevlar side plates called DAPs. We had our trauma plate up front and back, but the side was vulnerable, and he was shot with an AK round in the side, and really, really terrible day. And he left behind a widow. He and his wife were both athletic trainer majors at Washington State University, my alma mater. And so my battalion established a scholarship in his name at Wazoo. But anyway, Damien Fysick died today in 2004, and it was one of those shocking events where everybody in the battalion felt it. He was so well known across four companies, headquarters company, Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. Everybody knew Fysick, or fucking Fysick. Everyone knew Fysick. And so the word spread, like wildfire. And it sucked because we were just a few months from going home. We had our initial casualties early on, and those first guys who died probably saved the lives of a dozen, because it focused us early on that this was real shit. And that plus good leaders got us actually after that initial phase through Iraq fairly bloodlessly compared to other units. And so the last couple of guys we lost, it just made it worse because we were almost done. So that's what today is for me, is Fysick Day. If you want to look him up, Damien, standard spelling, Ficek, F-I-C-E-K. Damien Ficek. Great guy. I tweeted it out. Or did I? Oh, I think I put it on Facebook. There's that green flash again. But yeah, if you look it up, good for you. But if to drill back down to my point, if I was writing a history of the Iraq War, you know, he's one of 4,800 or 4,200 people that we lost, and you know, if you want to just make the point that war is tragic, okay, great, but that's not really what history is about, because you would spend, you know, 8,000 men died on D-Day. I'm sure there were some extraordinary people.
Dark secret place.
This radioactive
Brian Suits on KFI.
bomb the shit out of them.
Dark secret place with Brian Suits on KFI.
KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk. It is Dark Secret Place, the final Dark Secret Place for 2017. And as always, the world never takes a break for us, does it? The world has been melting down since 2007 when we started the show. And that's the royal we. When we started the show in 2007, Iraq was sort of front and center. So was Afghanistan. And then very quickly, the Arab Spring within a couple of years. And the militarization of the South China Sea by the Chinese. Building the islands, we were on that story very early on, years ago. I would say, and by golly, I'm proud of you. If you've been a long-time listener, never time caller, because I never take calls. I would say that you would score easily in the top 90, in the 95th percentile of Americans when it comes to either geographic knowledge or knowledge of current events. Because you folks also, by the way, you ask great questions. So so I can tell you're paying attention. That's really cool. At Dark Secret Place is the Twitter feed. I'm live streaming also on YouTube at unsheepyourself.com. Unsheep yourself, like you are a sheep. Now you want to unsheep yourself, so you do that. Well, so what are the plans? What about all those dudes in Syria? If you're unaware of this, we have a couple small FOBs, forward operating bases. I mean, physically in Syria, we have bases. And the Pentagon won't admit this, but the bases have names, just like they did in Iraq and Afghanistan. FOB Tillman, Anaconda. Mine was FOB Highlander. And we also operated out of another FOB. And I'm not making this up. It was Mule Skinner in 2003. But then the unit that was at that base, second Cav, they lost a soldier. So they immediately named it after the dead soldier. The dead soldier's name was Jose Cuervo. And so we thought for months, we thought it was a joke. Like FOB Miss January, bro, you know, or FOB Pam Anderson, or FOB Jack Daniels. And we thought FOB Cuervo. And then they finally put the plaque up, and we went, oh, gee, there really was a guy. There was a soldier, an E4, a specialist, Jose Cuervo. And so anyway, the FOBs in Syria have names. They're not telling us what the names are. I know the names because we're not officially confirming that these are there. These are called temporary forward aerial refueling points, FARPs, for Apache helicopters, etc. But those aren't supposed to have berms, and they're not supposed to have artillery and armor. And so we have a archipelago of bases now in eastern Syria. We also have a lot of soldiers and Marines, and then of course the militia that we back, these Syrian Defense Forces that we created, recruited, supported, equipped, trained, and led. So what is the deal now that ISIS is effectively an afterthought? They're an after effect in Syria. Are we giving back eastern Syria? Well, you make up your mind. The United States intends to bring more diplomats into Syria as efforts to combat ISIS in the country shift from a military offensive to stabilization. This is what Jim Mattis said. More than 98% of land that was once held by ISIS in Syria and Iraq has been liberated, according to coalition figures reviewing the situation at the end of the year. The focus of many is now moving towards reconstructing war-ruined cities. With this shift to stabilization, Mattis said on Friday, quote, "You'll see more U.S. diplomats on the ground." He said when you bring in more diplomats, they are working that initial restoration of services. They bring in their contractors, that sort of thing. So it actually does something. It doesn't go into the wrong people's pockets, close quote. So does that sound to anyone like we're handing this back to Bashar Assad? So, you know, Russia, Iran, and Syria think we should get out. But part of the deal, and again, going back a couple years, you've heard me telling you that the Syrian Kurds, who were not initially part of the rebellion against Assad, because they were a minority, and they knew that Assad was actually very good to minorities in Syria, because he's a minority. The Alawites are a minority, an offshoot of Shia. The Shia are a minority in Syria. The Christians, the Maronite and Chaldean Christians, are a minority in Syria. And they were protected because the majority Sunnis were not in charge. There's not one majority Sunni country, except Egypt, with exceptions, that protects the rights of minorities. There's no synagogues in Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or the Emirates. But believe it or not, there's some synagogues in Egypt, and there's a huge Coptic Christian population. They're under siege, but the government is at least making lip service to protecting them. If Syria was taken over by fundamentalist Sunnis like ISIS, then the Alawites would have been hanging from street lamps, and the Christians, and as an example for others to get out. So that's what the Kurds' stance towards Assad was, you know what? We're a ethnic minority. We're not Arabs, but we're Sunni. But bottom line, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, they're not just about any Sunni. They're specifically about Sunni Arabs. And so the Syrian Kurds initially carved out their own territory, kind of like northern Iraq, and then it was really clear about 5 years ago that Assad cut a deal with them, that Assad didn't want to fight ISIS. He wanted to fight his own rebels. He knew that ISIS was a flash in the pan. ISIS was a tribe off the reservation, and that he needed to concentrate on the rebels. And so he called in Hezbollah, he called in Iran, and then when they couldn't stabilize the place, Putin came in himself with the largest commitment of troops, combat troops and aircraft to an external country since Afghanistan, since the Russians left Afghanistan in 1989. And rarely, only when the Russians needed some good PR did they bomb ISIS. Their targets were the Sunni population centers like Homs and other Idlib and other large cities so that they could depopulate them. Because Putin and the Iranians said, while we're at it, as long as you're fighting the rebels, why don't you get their wives and kids to float to Greece and wind up in Germany? Why don't you just depopulate the country and get the hell rid of these people and let them become Jordan's problem and Iraq's problem and, hell, Turkey's problem? And Assad said, good plan. So that's what was going on. And so the deal with the Syrian Kurds seemed to be, on the surface of it, if you take it, you keep it. That Assad was so desperate in 2014 and 13 that he cut a deal with the one ally who he could count on to fight better than the Arabs, and that was his own Kurds. And he said, you take it, you keep it. And so they did. And so the U.S. comes along, and we called it the SDF because we brought in Arab fighters to join the rebels. Now, at the banks of the Euphrates, from the Euphrates to the Iraqi border, basically, we have decided that there's going to be a country there. And whatever it is, it's not Syria. Because we're not leaving. And this is Mattis publicly saying, We're sending more diplomats, and by diplomats he means sort of civil service, civil affairs people, like the restoration of water and what they call SWET, sewer, water, education, academics, and trash. Actually, education, academics, same thing, but anyway, it's called SWET restoration, and it's something we weren't prepared to do in Iraq in 2003. But in this case, we seem to be staying there with contractors, soldiers, Marines, and diplomats on the ground to support something that is not going to be Syria. And anyway, the Russians don't like it. The actual Syrians don't like it. The Iranians don't like it. Back right after this, latest out of North Korea, and how we got there on this one. And a significant date coming up right after this. KFI AM 640, the Dark Secret Place on KFI AM 640. More stimulating talk. Michael Chappé with the news.
A magnitude 3.5 earthquake has struck off the northern California coast. It struck at about 9:28 tonight, southwest of Fortuna. No reports of any damage.
Encrypted smartphones. No such thing. I mean, with all due respect to Telegram and Signal and Zello, which when I use Zello turns your phone into a walkie-talkie. You can either add conference channels or your friend on the other side of the world can download Zello and you guys can talk like a walkie-talkie. It's not encrypted. There is the American, Canadian, British, German, French, Italian, North Korean, Chinese, Russian, every intelligence service can break in, and listen. Now, if you're not a target of any of them, and I'm not, then you're fine. But because I had a talking to with someone once who said, well, you are pretty public. I mean, apparently KFI is kind of a big deal, and you talk about talking to people downrange. So why don't you just cut out the middleman and not cut out the risk and stop doing that? So yeah, I don't use any encrypted phone-to-phone, thing. The one basic measure that I do is I use a VPN when I talk to people. I use this thing called TunnelBear. And TunnelBear is off right now. And so to hide my location, I turn TunnelBear on, and the bear leaves California and he pops up in Canada. So if I talk to you right now, it gives me a Canadian IP. Now I can because I happen to know that the Lithuanians are very, very good, and the Norwegians and Swedes are very, very good, and their own internet's hardened. I can do this. I can choose to change my location. Tunnel to Sweden. So I can change my location to a Swedish IP. Watch him pop up there. There he is. So now when I tweet, it will think I'm in Sweden. It's called TunnelBear. Maybe you can see it up there. And there's a bunch. Someone else here was talking about ExpressVPN. There's a bunch of apps that do this. It slows you down. It's not. I don't think it's noticeable. In fact, it's It's free. In fact, if you tweet, but it has a cap on your monthly megabytes. And if you tweet about Tunnel Bear, if you say, hey, I'm on Tunnel Bear and I love it, they give you 1,000 megs. And I actually, like, there's certain shows on BBC that if you try to watch it on your computer, you're regionally locked out. It'll say that you're not authorized. Well, if you use a VPN, like Tunnel Bear, and you change your location to a British IP, suddenly you can stream these first-run BBC shows. Because BBC had a great series about the Germans winning the Battle of Britain and occupying Britain in 1944-45. And like U.S. Marine commandos come over to help the king get out and all that. Really, really cool. Cool little series. But it's not here. They are not showing it on BBC America. But I fooled the IP filter by using Tunnel Bear. But it ate up my megs. I still had it though. How much time do we have?
2 minutes.
Okay. Here's something that's not crackable though. If you do a video conference, if you do iPhone FaceTime, just keep in mind that I can sit here on a whiteboard or a piece of paper and I can communicate like that. So if you really are positive that you don't want someone cracking, into your feed like that, just do that. Honestly. And then maybe even hide your face if you're that. I'm going to do some old Rolling Stones. From Goat's Head Soup, I believe. All right. Queued up.
KFI AM 640.
An iHeart radio station.
Home of KFI in the sky.
KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk. It is the Dark Secret Place. Brian Suits in here until midnight. And if you are, if you're inclined to watch one of those, New Year's Eve shows or whatever, here's a little inside tip. I was texting with Kennedy earlier tonight. She's going to be hosting the Fox New Year's Eve thing with Jesse Waters, and I challenged her, and I said, if you don't say something along the lines of nobody's balls are dropping in 11-degree weather, then you just have no whatever. And then I can't repeat what I said. And she says, done. So listen for that. Listen for that phrase at Page. She's gonna, there's going to be a riff along the lines of no one's balls are dropping. And speaking of self-promotion, January 11th, my episode of Leno's Garage is going to be on CNBC. Jay Leno invited me to meet him up at the Gorman Off-Road State Park up there a couple of months ago. And we assessed a sort of a dream project for the Army, a propulsion system that's fairly radical, and we drove it around, and we talked about it. And so anyway, that's January 11th on CNBC. Then it'll be on YouTube, and we'll see if we can get him on next weekend to talk about it. But it was a really good time. He was a gent, really good guy. Brought my wife and daughter out there, and he was just very gracious guy. And you know, he asked a lot of questions about tactical movement in broken terrain, and I was teaching him how to drive a military vehicle and keep it hidden, you know, and things like that. So that was really cool. And in fact, the night before that, on January 10th, I'm live at the Arcadia Dave & Buster's. So go to Dark Secret Place on Twitter and the pinned tweet there, or on the Facebook page, Dark Secret Place, for information on how to buy tickets, because there's only 50 seats, and it's two for $25. But there's only a couple left. But I'm entitling it "How to Hide Your Guns in 2018 California," because if you've seen what we are 72 hours away from, the state of California, the state that you're in right now, is going to in many of your cases, you have objects that you legally possess in your house, and you passed a federal and state background check. And in 72 hours, if you don't tell the state of California that you have those, then you're going to be a criminal. And this is what kills me. Usually, laws, whether it's raising the drinking age or whatever, they grandfather in what you have. But from this point forward, from January 1st, 2018 on, okay, now any new purchase, you have to do this. Not in this case, not in this state. And I wish the NRA would grow some frozen balls and lay some money down in California, because these are what are called, and if you know anything about the American Revolution, you know this, laws that are written that are backwards enforceable are called ex post facto. Like, you're my political opponent and you're left-handed, and I pass a law saying left-handed people can't run for office. And so that drops in, what am I saying, 72 hours? It's coming up on, it'll be 24 and a half hours. That's going to be the law. All right, so President Mattis, with the Syria stuff, was also asked about American involvement in Yemen. Yemen is getting a lot more attention these days because there are several unfolding humanitarian crises, and the U.S. is on the ground in a big way in Yemen, but not involved in the, on the ground anyway, with the Saudi Houthi thing, which really is the Saudi versus Iran thing. We're on the ground cleaning up Al-Qaeda, remember them? So that's why we're on the ground there. In the air, though, there's something way different happening. We are assisting the Saudis with targeting, and we're also doing air-to-air refueling. And at a press conference yesterday, a reporter went back and forth with Mattis about the fact that we're assisting the Saudis in this. And Mattis explained to him in small words why we were assisting them. The question was, quote, Mr. Secretary, on Yemen, yesterday the UN came out and said that the Saudi-led coalition had killed 100 civilians in the past 10 days. I know how you feel about the Houthis and everything that they've done wrong, but the level of civilian casualties being brought upon by the coalition, Saudi-led coalition, is far higher than those being killed by the Houthis. Mattis says, and the guy says, the U.S. does provide intel and air refueling. Are you considering re-looking at that? Mattis says, no. And the guy continues, given just the civilian casualties there, Mattis says, the civilian casualties is why we have gone in to be helpful where we can in identifying how you do target analysis and how you can make certain you hit the right thing. The guy comes back, that doesn't seem to be working. Mattis says, so our effort is based on what? And he says, well, based on the 100 civilians killed in the past 10 days. Mattis says, yeah, well, that's your call. Well, I mean, the UN is saying it. Mattis says, that's fine. They probably know more about war than some other people then. So you're okay with that level of civilian casualty? Mattis says, I'm never okay with any civilian casualty. Don't screw with me on this. So are you looking at, how are you talking to them about reducing civilian casualties? Mattis says, how do you think we are? I don't know. Mattis says, I just told you. We're showing them how to use intelligence so that you're very precisely trying to miss killing civilians. The guy was expecting sort of if this continues, we're going to stop. Mattis is saying we're doubling down because we're going to take over and start doing their targeting so they stop killing civilians. A important date coming up in just a few days that might accompany a nuclear or a missile test out of North Korea, and each one of these is ratcheting up the tension. I'll tell you about that here in just a second. It is a Dark Secret Place final show of 2017, KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk. Michael Chappé with the news.
A person that advertised a MacBook Pro for sale on Craigslist has been robbed by the potential buyer.
Yeah, the California Rifle and Pistol Association is really good about that. I have the guy who set up my gun trust. In order to buy a suppressor, you have to set up a federal trust, and the suppressor is in the trust. And then you can put your other guns in the trust, and then anyone else is on the trust, like my wife is on the trust or whatever, then they can legally possess any of my suppressors. There's a lot of other things going on there, but in California, there is just not, you cannot, even though I federally am allowed to have suppressors, I can't have them in California. So California is just way out of their lane on firearms law on this. And they do it because they can get away with it. They do it because Kevin De Leon, is a fucking moron, but every other Democrat up there, including Gavin Newsom and Jerry Brown, is. And they spread misinformation like open carry, though in many cases, open carry was screwed over by the people who did it. You want a suppressor for a couple reasons. A lot of rifle ranges, classic old rifle ranges, are under a lot of pressure to close down. If you have a suppressor, the complaints about noise go down. Also, hunting with a suppressor, you're masking your location. And the biggest reason that a civilian can own a suppressor is because fuck you. That's the biggest reason. It's because there's no reason why we shouldn't. It's not a firearm. It doesn't kill anybody. And the background check to get a suppressor, are you fucking kidding me? You think they crawled up your ass for a handgun or a Mossberg 500 out of Big 5? Try buying a suppressor. And then you got to do it for each suppressor. You have to pay a $200 tax stamp to the ATF, and you literally get a stamp, big stamp, for every suppressor. You can't, do it once. And then, like a concealed carry permit in the state of Washington, when you have that, you can buy a gun without a background check. You fill out the form, the 4473, but there's no wait period or anything because you already had a background check to get the concealed carry. That's the whole goddamn point. The thing about a suppressor is the first time you buy one, it usually takes about 6 months. Because I already had a clearance, a secret clearance, and I was in the Pentagon system, I got mine in about 3 months. My first one. And then after that, they all were, 3 months. And in California, those arm cuffs, which are not buttstocks, those are legal. So you can effectively... You can have a pistol in California. You can have an AR-15 pistol, with an 8-inch barrel or 10-inch barrel, and you can put one of those short arm cuffs, which function as a buttstock. You can have a de facto short barrel rifle in California, but it legally has to be registered as a pistol. So this is one thing I don't like about YouTube Live is, you know, these, and I know if you're watching this later on, it's not live, you're wondering what I'm talking about, but these trolls who spam, you know, live YouTube, it's kind of bullshit. And you block them and you block them and you block them, like I'm trying to do. It's like not worth it.
Or a beauty fanatic. This is hair color.
It usually is, as long as it doesn't annoy anyone. By the way, hey, Chris Toon, what was that editing program you were talking about on Friday? Australian? What? You talked about a editing DaVinci Resolve. Okay.
Mood swings, lies. Don't ignore the signs of problem gambling. If you think you may have a problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER for counseling at no cost to you.
DaVinci Resolve.
California Department of Public Health.
Bring in 2018 from coast to coast on Fox with Steve Harvey. It's a New Year's Eve bash so big, we're throwing 2 parties in New York and Las Vegas. Performances by Maroon 5, Celine Dion, Macklemore, Backstreet Boys, Flo Rida, and more. Plus an unforgettable sing-along of Sweet Caroline with Neil Diamond. Fox's New Year's Eve with Steve Harvey. Live from Times Square. Starts at 8 p.m., 7 p.m. Central on Fox.
The last couple of years, there's been a lot of emphasis placed on sourcing stories. We've seen a lot more people clued into the sources of information for all of these stories.
I love the way that you and I cover breaking news on our show and put together a complete picture of what's going on by vetting those reports. And so often people are so eager to get the information out right away.
Gary and Shannon.
You gotta be careful to where it's coming from.
Weekdays at 10 a.m. on KFI.
An iHeart radio station.
KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk. It is the Dark Secret Place. Brian sits in here until midnight. I'll give you the latest out of Iran as street protests continue. And again, the big difference between 2009 and now is that these are far more widespread than they were in 2009. And in many cases, local authorities now are becoming a huge problem because they're not responding to them. And the central authorities in Tehran just don't have enough Revolutionary Guards guys to go around. In 2009, the Iranians shut down cell service by basically blocking any numbers that had the Iranian country code. I forget what it is. Well, what happened then was British intelligence began distributing out of their embassy in Tehran, began distributing phones or SIM cards, with the 044 country code, the UK country code. And the Iranian authorities thought they were very clever, going, oh, look at that, we flipped a switch, and now they can't cut out. But we can still be friendly with German and British businessmen and all that. And so for a couple days, the protesters had 044 country code. So the Iranians just shut down everything on like day 6. And so the next step was getting satellite phones, as I described, Thuraya, the big Middle East satellite phone provider. And the deal there is you need to actively block the signal. The GPS signal, the sat phone signal, even though they orbit lower than GPS do, you can still blast out the signal. You can, in other words, you can shoot white noise at the same frequency. on K-band or KU band. And the Iranians have been experimenting with that, apparently, because people with sat phones have described that on certain days, on certain prayer days and things like that, they will not get a fix on their telecom satellite. And so will the Iranians do that? Do they suspect sat phones are in there? Well, I'll tell you, one of the weird things is that the signals are still getting out. So it seems very likely that people either have alternate ways of posting via smartphone or something else. And I am curious because in 2009 and 10, U.S. SOCOM, Special Operations Command, had a RFP, a request for proposal, specifically for SOCOM, for small handheld electronic devices that would effectively transmit a local Wi-Fi signal that would be autonomous of any other authorities. And so I'm kind of curious, because we're now 8 years since that RFP and the contract was awarded, and things like that, by the way, happen really fast. This is not an F-35. You know, it literally takes 20-something years. Things like that that SOCOM asks for tend to happen pretty quickly. January 8th is the birthday of Kim Jong-un. And wild stab, I'm saying like 32 or something like that. And the birthdays of the leaders, Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, his dad, and then Kim Jong-un, are big deals. The great leader, Kim Il-sung, the founder of North Korea, his birthday is a huge day of parades and all that. Of course, his son, the middle Kim Jong-il, same thing. Of course, they're dead guys, but their birthdays are still celebrated. Kim Jong-un, his is coming up here on the 8th, and so this is the deal. Here's how you look for this. On January 7th, around 2:30 or 3 in the afternoon our time, that is sunrise January 8th in North Korea. And that is traditionally when they have been testing their either their nuclear bombs or missiles. They like, especially the missiles, they like photographing the missiles in very favorable early morning light or even nighttime. This last missile launch 2 months ago was extremely rare because it was like 4 a.m. their time. But it seemed to be timed because it preceded an American reconnaissance aircraft taking off from South Korea to be airborne, to be on station, to for dawn. So in other words, they launched before we could put a plane on station, which we've been doing every day. Well, so anyway, January 8th for North Korean purposes is going to be on January 7th, our time, at like I say, around 3 p.m. That's their time. And what day? January 7th. January 7th is, of course, going to be a Sunday. So Sunday around 3 p.m. Next Sunday around 3 p.m. Would be traditionally where you would hear that another ICBM was tested or launched, or an H-bomb, or Richter scales in Japan and China are reporting a 4.9 or a 5.1 in the vicinity of Pengyi-ri, which is where they test their nukes. So that's how that works. So I'll give you a heads up next Sunday, or probably next Saturday, next Dark Secret Place, because it'll be midnight. It'll be several hours before that. So this is a bit of a surprise. Indonesia has been a fairly firm ally of the U.S. for the last couple decades, especially post 9/11 and post Bali bombing. By the way, U.S. Special Forces guys and contractors helped set up the Indonesians' very effective counter-terror unit called Detachment 88. Well, imagine our surprise. The Indonesians are shopping for a next-generation fighter for their Air Force. They're going Russian. They're going with the Russian Su-27, as seen in the skies over Syria. And the Russians seem to be offering a little more. We'll give them to you half price if we can fly some of our long-range nuclear bombers, the Tu-95s. If we can fly our what are called Bear, Tu-95 Bear bombers, if we can have exercises on Papua New Guinea we might make it worth your while on the fighter planes. And that's how the Russians do work. So the U.S. is pivoting towards Asia. Remember that phrase from Obama? Well, the Russians are showing that they can pivot too, and I'll tell you why. The Australians are having a minor freakout over Russian bombers based in New Guinea. Never, ever, ever have they been that far south. We'll be back right after this. The final Dark Secret Place for 2017. Brian Suits in here one more time. On KFI, AM 640, more stimulating talk. Michael Chappé with the news.
Cops have shot a man in the Winnetka area. The guy apparently fired on LED.
Oh. Huh. Yeah, and that's my issue is I need a really good video card for gaming and all that. Yeah. Alrighty, let's see. AFP update. That Navy UFO footage, I think was huge because it was the first time that the Pentagon has ever released a unidentified aerial, whatever they call it, a UAP. And then that's the other thing is people start thinking, well, they're prepping us for something. So I don't know. But I do know that it's not some, trailer idiot talking to George Noory at 4 a.m. That, we're talking about experienced aviators. And so that I took that seriously. They weren't drones. They just were not. And there was a fleet of them. So, and besides, if they were a DoD drone system, that video never would have been released. It would not have made it off the carrier. That would have been deleted on the plane. That never would have been downloaded for a briefing, and it never would have left the Nimitz. Full stop. The Department of Defense will guard a classified drone system with more vigor than they will a UFO sighting. So, so there's that. All right, what should the final bumper be?
105, a car is blocking down off-lane and traffic slows at the scene. KFI Traffic is brought to you by Pacific Sales. KFI on the Sky helps get you there faster. I'm David Stinson.
Hurry, beat the price increase. Whirlpool, Franke, GE, and other manufacturers will raise prices up to 6% January 1st. Shop Pacific Sales now, sir.
I mean, that's the thing. That video, that FLIR video of a craft that does not move like an airplane, I think that's the first real information that we've ever had from the DoD. That's not disinformation. Larry's asking about the run-of-the-mill Shia and yeah, in my experience, the Arab Shia, like the Iraqis, were far less likely to want to martyr themselves. And you could deal with a lot of Shia because, by and large, they don't go 5 times a day to the mosque. In fact, the Shia have kind of a drive-through mosque called a Hosaniya. And Saturday through Thursday, you go to La Hosaniya. And you just go, hey, God, how you doing? Friday is your big day. The Sunni, especially the ardent Sunni, they drop what they're doing 5 times a day. And then on Friday, they get there before sunrise. The men are there all day. They don't leave until 2 or 3 on Fridays. And so that's why it was a really easy technique in Iraq. If you want to get the truth from people, you drove around on Friday. For the rest of the U.S. Army, it was, we can take Friday off because they're all in the mosque. I was like, no. The ones we want to talk to are working. Maybe they're working in a chop shop, but who gives a fuck? You know, we have chop shops in America too. So I did a lot of really good work on Fridays. If you are a contractor or someone who's going to go in the U.S. military, or you are in the U.S. military, always engage and cultivate sources on a Friday, because no one's watching them. There's no social pressure.
They create luxurious, ammonia-free, salon-quality, at-home hair color that saves women time.
And we have settled on, well, you know what? Here's the thing. We should not be in bed with the Saudis. We should always have the Saudis understand that one day there might be another Shah again. The Saudis were never managed better than when we had the Shah. We don't, especially with fracking, we don't owe them shit. And that is why the Saddam Shah of Iran thing was so important to the Saudis and the Gulf Arabs. That if the Shah existed, they needed a huge pool of military men, and those are called Iraqis. And so when we overthrew Saddam, that's what pissed off the Saudis, is that we were unleashing a Shia flood. But the deal is, it's not really a Shia flood. The birth rate in Iraq is skyrocketed, but they're Arabs. So, yes, I did. On ammo, I stocked up. I already have an assload of 5.56 green tip and an assload of 300 blackout and 45. I have lots of that. And then, and I highly recommend, if you're going to buy a California compliant featureless AR-15, do it through Shield Group up in Idaho. Shield Group was started by a bunch of former Southern California law enforcement guys. They left the state and opened a factory up in Idaho to make California compliant AR-15s. So check them out. Just Google Shield Group AR-15s. They are the way to go. Reloading is easy. It's fun. If you have like 2 or 3 friends to go in with you, that's the way to do it. Reloading is awesome. KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk. The Dark Secret Place, one last time for 2017, everybody. The Iranian protests now starting day 3. If you want to check them out live, go to hashtag Iran protests on Twitter. There is video and stuff. But this is, and you're lucky to find any airtime on any American news station. CNN's first report about the Iran protests were reporting on the regime-sponsored counter-protests, which is pretty lame. But these are different from 2009 for the reasons I told you, earlier in the show. To sort of reiterate here, it's economically, when Iran and Iranians were told for the past 10 years, just you wait till we get that money back. It will be invested in infrastructure and roads, and there will be jobs for everybody, and this will be a good place to be, and you don't have to leave the country to have your kids and the whole thing. Well, that nuclear deal, the JCPOA, has been in effect for 2 years and more, and all the money that was supposed to be trickled down to the average Iranian has not. It's only enriched the mullahs, and especially Khamenei and the other members of the Supreme Council. Between that money and their ability to seize property, Khamenei himself is worth $65 billion. And they have been literally, since Iranians fled in 1979 and 80 and came to Beverly Hills, the seizure of abandoned property has absolutely enriched the upper tier of leadership, who are not elected. Anyone who's elected in Iran, especially on the national level, they are show ponies. They really have no authority. And you can see they have no authority right now. Because if President Rouhani, the moderate cleric, if he ordered the Revolutionary Guard back to their barracks, they would laugh at him as they drove by and shot into the air. They answer to the Supreme Council, period. The police answer to the Supreme Council. The elected so-called president is practically a figurehead. He's really an administrative guy. He's like the city manager. Oh, I'm sorry. He's like the mayor versus a city manager. If you have a city with a city manager, then you know that guy really does everything. But you elect the mayor because he's got a cool name. Anyway, back to Australia. Russian bombers based out of Papua New Guinea for a so-called exercise. The Australian broadcast company can reveal that the Royal Australian Air Force Base at Darwin has been placed on a short period of heightened alert, while over 100 Russian personnel and several aircraft are stationed at the Biak Air Base in eastern Papua province. During the 5-day stopover, 2 nuclear-capable Tu-95 bombers flew their first ever patrol mission over the South Pacific, prompting concerns that they may have been collecting valuable intelligence and rattling sabers. The Russian Ministry of Defense claims its strategic bombers carried out air alert missions over neutral waters of South Pacific Ocean in flights lasting more than 8 hours. Well, the Australians have never seen Russian bombers in their skies off their coasts. This is the stuff that we have been seeing since the Cold War started. It went away a bit in the 90s, but then remember July 4th, 2015, and 2 Russian Tu-95s flew out of eastern Russia, out of Siberia, down off Alaska, down through the Gulf of Alaska, off British Columbia, all the way down off the Northern California coast. And the Russians wished us happy 4th of July. Of course, they didn't really mean it. They were being sarcastic. But they flew straight down the West Coast off California, turned around, flew back. And they're doing it just to show, hey, we can do this. They do that because we do the same thing. Same reason we fly reconnaissance aircraft off their coast so that we can say, hey, we do this. So this is what Al Jazeera is saying. Al Jazeera, of course, in Qatar. And the Qatari government is suspected of being very sympathetic, though they're Sunni, of Iran. This is how Al Jazeera is reporting these protests. Death or freedom. It's a chant that was heard around Iran this week. Protesters are angry at the high cost of basic goods. The price of eggs, for example, has gone up 40% in just 6 months. Some Iranians say it is time for the government to focus on domestic issues and to forget about Syria and Palestine. These protesters hoped that the Iran nuclear deal in 2015, which led to the lifting of many international sanctions, would ease their financial struggles, but for many, it not only didn't improve them, but made it worse. And so that's what's behind this. It's a little bit different than 2009. Like I told you, the big difference between now and 2009 is that in 2009, the Iranians were not losing young men that they frankly can't spare in somebody else's civil war in Syria. Now they are. So a lot of Iranians are just saying, you know what, I've had it up to here with this dookie. All right, thanks to Hector and Michael Chappé. The Dark Secret Place now closing out our 10th year, and we will start year 11 next Saturday night live. And again, go to the Facebook page, Dark Secret Place, or the Twitter feed, and you can find out about the live show coming up in Arcadia and how you can get exclusive content through the Dark Secret Place YouTube channel. We are building a network on YouTube, and you can be a part of that. So check that out at Facebook as well. And we'll talk to you back here tomorrow night. Everyone be safe, and we'll see you next Saturday here in the Dark Secret Place, KFI AM 640, more stimulating talk. Alrighty. I'll let you in on a secret. I'm pre-taped tomorrow night for Super Hyper Local Sunday, but it'll be Well, am I registering assault weapons? You'll have to come to the live show in Arcadia on January 10th and get that answer. Alrighty. We will talk to you probably tomorrow.